Welcome, everyone. We have half an hour, so I want to dive right into it. So I'm going to let my awesome panel, and yeah, I picked it, and it's awesome. So them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma, and I'm from Velux. And we, if you don't know us, we make rooftop windows. So, but there I work in software engineering, obviously, which is hopefully why you're here. I work as a platform advocate, and I come from product management, but have kind of moved into this more advocacy space.
Hello, I'm Kat, and I work for Syntasso, Bureaucratics, which is a platform tool, and maybe more interestingly for this panel, before I was at Syntasso, I worked at ThoughtWorks for 4 years as a platform product manager and platform product owner.
Hi everyone, my name is Lepp, and I manage the customer success team at Port. If you've never heard of Port before, we provide open internal developer portals. And I've been with the company for a year. My background is in security. I've been onboarding a lot of security teams for different tools, and recently pivoted to developer domain, and I love it, and that's why I'm here.
I have a mic. Cool. So I'm Karen Martin. I currently work at Trainline. Hopefully most people know Trainline, but that is a platform in itself for selling train tickets across UK and Europe. And what I do then, I look after engineering productivity, kind of holistically, looking at the sort of people processing and tools.
Awesome. And I'm Jennifer Riggins. I'm a tech journalist specializing in the developer experience, which means I've written a lot about this thing called platform engineering and that other thing called DevX and team topologies, all of that. And I've written about every woman here, so I know they're good. And they know their stuff, and we want to tell the stories as much as possible. Also, if you see around a really garish sign, Matthew told me to do this, I am doing Battle Cancer this weekend, so if anyone wants to donate to Pancreatic Cancer UK, it's a very important cause, so I want to plug that. And with that in mind, let's dive right into it. I just want to make sure the audience, who here understands, and it's okay not, what platform engineering is? Like the difference from platform and things. So great. So what we're talking about here is that big difference, because platforms have always existed. The idea is that how do you turn your platform from just technology that's top down, don't do this, which for security purposes, that does have a space still. Don't, zero trust security and all. These are valid, but how do you turn it into this idea that you have platform as a product where your customers are probably more annoying, more loudly, more demanding, and oh yeah, they're your colleagues. So we're going to talk about that today, and I think raise your hand if there's something you want to talk about and you want to ask questions throughout, please do, and I'll feed them back for the camera or repeat back for those listening later. But yeah, the idea of this, so for us, what we were most interested in talking about, but again, we want to make it for the crowd, was, well, this is a Team Topologies adjacent or official conference, I'm not sure. So I think the thinnest viable platform is a really interesting concept. And then we also, because it's a product, is also you would have a minimum viable product. So I thought we should talk about the difference and how do you get started on your platform journey or your platform engineering journey and product. So do you want to kick off? Sorry.
I think in terms of the thinnest viable platform, it's really just starting with a problem. So not trying to build a whole platform full of capabilities from the get-go. Like start with something that your engineers are having an issue with. That could be, I think a typical one is managing and writing Helm charts, right? If that's difficult for engineers, maybe start with making some sort of generic service chart. That could actually be kind of an API onto your platform, and then building from there. So,
one thing that I see go quite wrong when people think about their minimum viable platform is they try and do a little bit of everything. And like with platforms, you're never building in a vacuum, right? Like it's not something that is coming out of nowhere and is brand new and greenfield and people are going to accept like a tiny bit of everything. So you need to think more of like, how do I do something end to end? What is the thinnest job that I can help someone get done? So I think your point, Emma, was amazing there. Like that is a job someone needs to do. They need to figure out how to write their Helm charts and configure them and change them. Great. one job, do it all the way, do it well. And then you can build out from that of like, okay, so what's the next problem that you've got to deal with, rather than thinking like, how do I do something really skinny, but it doesn't actually help me compared to what I've already got today?
What are some examples of what ended up being the thinnest viable platform at your organizations or for your companies?
What I have seen as being quite high impact and working very well as a first use case is giving developers a self-service action to achieve an operation autonomously and saving a ton of time and gives a better experience ultimately. I think that's definitely one high value.
It also makes sense because that's an early win, and the whole point in platform engineering is your developers don't have to use your product. You need to sell it to them to use it. A platform, which again, security and stuff, they do have to use. But the rest, they're your customers. So you want that early win, that early example. So if they feel successful up front, that's basic marketing.
Yeah, I think it's still quite a new concept really to kind of have this mindset. And I think I've definitely seen it before where we're not really making that context switch of treating it like a proper product. So not necessarily having a product owner, like you have like an engineering manager who maybe doesn't think about the overall product vision or that kind of really treating it like any other product. And I think that does require a lot of thinking into what you think the problems are. And like you said, like starting with a problem, like as opposed to, I've often seen the challenges that maybe they start with the solution, like something's a new technology or something kind of a new capability is available, and instead of just kind of jumping on it and going with it, actually sort of thinking what are the problems. And DevX and productivity mean very different things to different people, and it's really intangible and really difficult to measure. So I think, it's all about, I think quite a lot of the time your use case is quite unique, and it's really about really thoroughly understanding the problems.
Absolutely. And none of y'all mention it, but it's been 13, 14 years as a technology storyteller, and the number one thing developers complain about is a lack of documentation. The number one thing developers do not want to contribute to is documentation. The number one productivity intruder is finding stuff, who does what, how do I do that? And this is actually one of the rare situations where Gen AI may be very useful. Not rare. Rare so up to now. It's very useful. So I think that's very interesting. Emma, you are a platform advocate. So that is kind of a internal developer marketing role. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I think a lot of the things I'm doing now, I did before as well as a product manager. That is doing discovery work, user research, kind of applying some UX methods into this field. We see that a lot in product teams, right? For external products, but not really for internal products. So I focus a lot on that, and then I focus a lot on learning. Which is kind of based on what the software developers or our users are needing. So if they don't understand something, we'll then spend time helping them, advocating for them, also talking to upper management to make sure that developers have a voice and that they're actually heard.
That makes sense because they're some of the most expensive employees, and if you're not investing in their productivity, why? Yeah, I think part of that, what is interesting is your colleague, Abby Bangser, had written a whole article about this idea of the MVP versus the TVP, because it sounds like, oh, you're making a team of topologies, minimum viable product. No, there is prototyping, there is minimum viable products to see if these new internal customers like what you're building. But the difference is with the thinnest viable platform, it's a platform. You have to keep building on it. This is not something you're testing out and iterating on. You will iterate, you will improve on, but it's something you have to continue to build on. So you are responsible for whatever you're building for potentially ever, or until they ditch the program because of budget cuts and you've not proven that you're good.
I think there's a point in that, and also what Emma was saying around that internal advocacy, internal marketing. So we spoke a bit before about metrics and how would you measure the success of your platform, and that really annoys me as a conversation because it's really hard. But one of the key things that I think around there is how many people are using your platform and are they getting value out of it. So rather than saying quantifying that value improvement, if people are using a platform, so all of the advocacy work that you're doing internally of like, hey, here are the problems, people can come hop onto my platform and solve that pain that they're feeling, that makes it much, much easier. Like, you know you're delivering value if people are using the thing that you're building, and then maybe you can think about how much value, how do I improve it, how do I make it better, because measuring these things is really hard. If it wasn't, someone would have just built a tool that you could plug in and solve it, and no one's done that yet.
And I think to add to this, it's very important to have an alignment across the organization of what are the desired outcomes that you want to get from that minimum viable product. Like, I hate metrics discussions as well. They're very, very hard. It's hard to measure. It takes time to measure value and see ROI. But I think as long as, if you're aligned and also be transparent with your organization that this is a journey and we're part of it and you're influencing it and defining it, I think you will be able to demonstrate success, basically.
Mm-hmm. I think for us, definitely, we kind of started with sort of DORA metrics initially as kind of the gateway into kind of like looking at productivity metrics, the gateway metrics, and having a look at it and realizing. And I think it's really important to give you those initial signals and see where you are as an organization. But the more I've kind of spent time in this area, I'm just realizing that metrics are just never tell you the whole story. Like I always said they're a start of a conversation. And I think I started realizing it's just that context is everything with regards to it. What you said about like making sure you have that alignment, I think it's also about thinking and understanding what productivity and DevX actually mean to your organization, because it could mean completely, like depending on what industry you're in or how your culture is, it could mean completely different things. And again, like if you're optimizing for lead time for change, but what your engineers actually care about is having proper dedicated focus time, then even if you've moved the metric in one way, like you're not actually successful at all in what you're trying to achieve, or like you have that disalignment. So I think it's really important to actually realize again, like what does productivity mean to you? And also I think the quantitative data can also become quite kind of hollow as well. So I think it's really good to, if you can, and you've got the time to kind of have those conversations, get that individual feedback and quantitative feedback, and then ideally trying to find a way to aggregate that so that you can sell that strong story, I think, to continue investment.
So I will say we had the exact same problem. Like 2 years ago, I was working with a client, and we'd spent ages, I think months, trying to do the, Thomas in the audience was there too, trying to get the DORA metrics sorted. And it was like trying to align all of the teams who were all doing their own thing in their own different way. It was impossible. Someone was maintaining a spreadsheet that they were sharing around every week. It was a pain in the bum. Whereas we were also in the platform team doing user interviews, and they would take maybe an hour and sending a survey that was like, how long do you think it takes you to do this? Tick. And that was so much easier for us to measure and figure out what was going on than some poor person having to ask every team how many times they've deployed this month.
Does everyone here know DORA metrics? And that's okay. Just making sure. Yeah, we should define maybe real quick. Let's, as a group, let's see if we can rattle them off. What are they? Come on.
Mean time to restore.
Mean time to restore. What else we got?
Deployment frequency.
Deployment frequency. Change failure rate.
Lead time for change.
And lead time to change. There we go. And sometimes resiliency's in there, which is not a number. So I guess your zeros. But yeah, I think that's always good that we define for everyone, because we tend to talk in codes that maybe our developers don't know what those mean.
And acronyms. We love acronyms.
Yes, acronyms are beautiful until they're not.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think lead time of change is one that's been really interesting that we've always seen look at and kind of optimize. But again, I feel like another issue is that they don't tell you the pain that people are feeling as well. So I think it's that you said when you were talking about what's the real problems we should go after, the metrics. Like 2 teams could both have a lead time for change of 5 days, and one could be completely like fine and painless and automated, and the other one could be like just hating everything about what they're doing. So I think having that, I mean, at the end of the day, developer joy and happiness is really what we're trying to do, which it's really difficult to measure.
Is what drives productivity, absolutely. So how do you know, when you're starting a conversation with your developers, how do you know what's causing them pain? What are the questions you're asking to get them to like start this conversation? As hopefully it's more of a peer-to-peer situation, so they may feel more open and safe to speak up.
It's really hard, right? Like everyone here is saying, it's really hard to sometimes get developers to speak. That can be pretty hard as well. But I think one thing I really enjoy is I enjoy doing user journeys. So I just call them developer journeys, but they're the same thing. So what I do is that I'll sit in a room, like Kat spoke about, sit with them for an hour, kind of have them go through steps of, it could be something you want to discover more about, like how they use their pipelines or what is their onboarding flow or something like that. But then have them go through steps, what they've done, what they're doing, and then kind of have them put into words what feelings are they feeling, what kind of pains are there, and then in the end you have all this data that you can kind of make kind of a curve, like what's good, what's bad, and it'll show what kind of improvements you can do, right? So look it up online. It's like very widely used UX method, user journeys. So I enjoy doing those.
As you heard me moan about earlier, metrics are hard. I'm also quite lazy. So one thing that has been really successful on my teams is it's not just me doing the interviews. I have 3 or 4 other people with me, and everyone has a job. So I've done the exact user journey thing. It works really, really well. But someone will be responsible for making sure that all of the actions are captured. Someone's responsible for capturing the feelings of how someone's doing. Someone's responsible for capturing all of like the points of improvement which someone calls out. Because that structure makes it much easier, because if you just sit down with someone and say, tell me what's annoying you about work today, then you will get someone ranting at you for an hour aimlessly without being able to quantify, like, are there actually hotspots? Like, if we focus on the beginning of the CI/CD journey, are we going to get a load more value than if we focus on the whole thing?
Sometimes they need that moment, though. And sometimes that's your biggest gift, that they feel heard.
Yeah, it's important to definitely like listening to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes they have good, important things to say. Sometimes they are not always right on what they want. And I think what I've seen our customers do, different flavors, also one-on-one interviews, workflow mapping, understanding, tell me what is your SDLC look like, and then very quickly you'll find out where the inefficiencies or the pains or which part they hate the most. I've seen also customers do surveys. Some are like lovers, some are haters, some are in between. But I think if you have a survey structured and you have a real goal in mind, what you want to get from this, and then you send it out and you get, again, alignment across the organization that you need to complete the survey, I think it gives you some really good broad statistics about across the R&D team. But it will miss a lot of context, the real pains. They might not always be very honest as well. Maybe they want to tell you what you want to hear. So I think both of them work. Also, even working groups, just mapping out, like with the Miro board, what do I want, what is I hate the most, what do I love the most, can work really well as a starting point.
Really tricky. I think just trying to do a mix of various different things. I think we know the sort of diversity of engineers and how they like to communicate and what works with them as well. So I think having a mix of, I think just giving the option of like one-on-one interviews or having like survey data, some of it maybe anonymized, non-anonymized. Also, I think I really like to think of looking at the whole kind of process and thinking about where do we think there's like blockers or waste, and sort of getting them to kind of mark out the process of where they have problems. I tend to think it quite holistically as well. Because again, I think you can, if you optimize for part of the flow, or one part of the process, and don't consider the whole thing as well, that can often get you into trouble. So I think trying to look at the whole flow and understand where the real pain points or sources of waste are really, I think, because that's often the most frustrating thing. Yeah,
I've interviewed now hundreds of companies about this, and every company does it different. Some have borrow an engineer of a team that wants something and say, okay, can we borrow you for 2-3 months and you help build it? They're inner sourcing their platform, and that really works. Other companies pair program with different teams and do a rotation, so they really get that feeling of pain and understanding and the user flow, because sometimes things emerge. How are you then, when you're testing out, I guess the measurements start at the beginning, because we've talked about both quantitative and qualitative. What are some questions you're asking your developers or your customers to understand if things are moving, if you're improving at all?
I mean, I speak to them, right? If they come to a problem, then I will kind of have that feedback loop already going, and I will ask them whether whatever we tried out helped them. So it's a pretty low key way to do it, right? But then also surveys. If I sent them out quarterly, and when I do that, I'll obviously capture some new information each time. Yeah, stuff like that. But
What are you asking on those surveys, those quarterly surveys?
Actually, I use a DX template. I don't know if you've heard about DX. It's a pretty great company. And they have this template. And that's just because I'm not good at survey design. So I don't want to design it myself because I've tried that a bunch of times and it goes horribly. And I always figure out something wrong with my surveys because I'm really not educated in that area. So I use a template and it works really well, right? It's based on their research on the DevX framework. So if you want to just start out by doing surveys, try to grab that template. It's free and it's online. So
yeah, it has the 25 socio-technical factors that go into development, which some of them are technical, but some of them are like docs or other really head bang against a wall frustrations.
Yeah, and what I did this time is that there'll be different drivers, and it can be like kind of tooling, more technical stuff. It can also just be team processes or organizational matters, right? And I asked management, like, what are some drivers that are interesting for you? Because once they choose those drivers, they'll be more inclined to actually investing if we see some issues with it, right? Because they had a say in it. So that's something I can recommend.
Another way of focusing, so that's really good for the quantitative. If you're asking one-on-one, what was the last thing you tried to do on the platform? How was that for you? And then it's quite open-ended and gets them started and gives you good data of like what are people actually trying to do on your platform as well. So if it's like, oh, well, I really wanted to do this, but I didn't find it, because I've had that come up before of like, I had this job that I really wanted to find, but I couldn't find the docs for it. And I don't think you've built this into the platform. When are you going to build it? And you're like, okay, cool. Well, that's a good prioritization data for me there. Should have built that first. But it helps calibrate, I think. I found that a good place to start. And then you can follow up with how was it? Did it work? Did it not work? What bits were missing? And then that explores it and keep it quite open.
I think maybe just to add on, they covered everything that I would have covered, but just compare the results, like send a survey out before you build a internal developer platform or portal, and then send it afterwards again to see what is the difference between the answers. And I think then you know pretty well if you're on the right path or you need to start again or change something. So, yeah.
So actually, as part of our retro kind of process, every month we have these health checks that we run as well, where people have to kind of score certain questions around it. And honestly, one of the most useful ones, I think, is actually just getting people to score how productive they feel in their role, or or how do they feel about health of the code base, how they feel about this. There's quite a few different questions where it is like literally 1 to 5 scoring. So. It's not 100%, but you start to see this heat map come together of where the real problems are and trends of it. And also sometimes you get teams that are really pessimist, and also kind of like the baseline of some teams as well, and how some of them are always going to be like, say everything's fine, and you're like, I know your team, it's definitely not. But it's been interesting to sort of see that. So I think just asking people just generally how productive they feel can be quite an interesting one as well.
So you ladies have said do surveys a lot, and I've had very little success with surveys ever in my career because no one answers them, because they are like fully sick of filling in the forms
Do they
for surveys.
feel like it's actionable? Because surveys without action piss people off, but surveys with action increase this rate of response. So maybe they're going into the echo chamber and they have survey burnout.
I found we asked, and it was survey fatigue of like, will I do this work one that says like a pecan survey for how happy I am in my day-to-day job, and then I have to fill in this one, and then I have to give feedback on this meeting, and could you just let me do my job, please? With a lot of the feedback I've got. How have you, I've sort of usurped the panel here, sorry. How have you countered that?
I mean, at my former company, it was easier because I was on premise, on location. Now I work remotely, right? So meeting the developers is harder. And so the answer rate is lower because they don't know me as well as they did at my former company, where I would know everyone by name and face, and I would have a 85% answer rate, which is, I think, pretty damn good for a survey, right?
No, it's very good.
But yeah, I mean, you just try something, right? And you iterate on it. And if it doesn't work, then scrap that and try something else. That's I think, my biggest point.
Yeah, I was going to say the health checks, I think, helps because it's part of that kind of like 2 weekly retro thing with all together, and it's literally just them having like a one button kind of click thing. Then it doesn't seem like too much of an overhead, and because they're doing it as a group, it's increased engagement. And with the surveys at the moment, generally I've tended to do a lot of them kind of one-on-one with quite engaged people. So yeah, potentially fatigue may be coming, but I think just trying to mix it up, keep things moving along, and if it stops working, then try something else.
Mm-hmm. Slack surveys seem to do well too, or putting them in the code in GitHub or something that pops up in that moment. Not retros are good and valuable, but there's a lapse usually by the time you have it. So having a mix of everything seems to do well.
Yeah, we've experimented actually exactly like that, like as it happens. So you run an action or you export the data or view some kind of a report. And after you've completed the operation, then you'll get a survey, just one question. And I think that's another thing. Maybe there's too many questions. Just one question, did it help you, yes or no? And I think if you feel like it made you feel empowered, you probably will give it a rating. Also, equally, if it pissed you off, most likely you'll say something about it. So having, I think, in-product feedback loop will be a very good thing, I think.
And they are still humans, developers, even though maybe management doesn't think so. So I think the statistic is like 4 times more likely to respond to a survey or offer feedback or rating if we're pissed off. But in this situation, you kind of want that because they're going to be more active in providing you with feedback and everything. I love the perspective, the perception questions I think are really valuable. How productive did you feel this week? Anonymize the shit out of that. You do not want to do anything that makes people, especially in this economic climate, feel insecure in their work. That's not going to be successful. We know that, as we said, developer joy is the biggest driver of developer productivity because they're supposed to be problem solvers. It's supposed to be creative. So thank you all for joining this creativity. You can all find us on LinkedIn and continue the conversation, continue in the hallways, and I'll continue through the rest of the conference. Thank you all so much.